Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. On this week's episode, I am going to run you through why you need to start with the habit you want to create first if you are trying to implement something new. So, if you are somebody who has struggled to get going on a new habit, or you're somebody who is just looking to make a big change in your life and you want to make a new habit change, then this week's episode is designed for you. Before I get into this week's episode, though, I do want to ask you a few big favors. Please make sure that you're subscribed on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, or if you're watching it on YouTube, jump on there and give us a follow. You can also please leave us a 5-star review if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, and share it around with anybody who you think might get some value out of what it is that I am doing here. By you sharing it around, giving us a follow, and leaving a review, it helps us continue to grow the podcast, which has seen some pretty amazing growth over the last 2 years. So, this week, as I mentioned at the start of the episode, we're talking about why you need to start with the habit first whenever you're trying to create a new habit. So this podcast has come about. This week I was having a conversation with a lady about she's trying to start at the gym. Really common story I hear all the time. The person is trying to get 3 times a week in for their gym sessions. They want to be able to be consistent with it, start that as a regular habit and routine. And this lady started this, what's kind of kickstarted this whole thing is she's read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. Now, I think it's a fantastic book for anybody to read or listen to. I listened to it on the audiobook version. I'm more of an audiobook guy rather than a hard copy person. I'm trying to be more of a hard copy reader. But it is a great book because it breaks down essentially how James feels is the most effective way to implement a new habit or implement a routine. And part of that is about things that I've spoken about on the podcast over and over again over the last 2 years. But one episode that we did recently is really like picking the low-hanging fruit. So trying to work out what is going to be the simplest thing for you to implement that is going to give you the biggest result. I spoke about it on a slightly different level to what it goes through in the book, but if you are somebody who wants to implement new habits, it is something that I would strongly suggest you have a look at. Have a look at reading Atomic Habits by James Clear. Anyway, I digress. So this has all started because this particular lady has read that book. And one of the things she's picked up from the book is about setting up triggers in order to start a new habit. So say, for example, if we're looking to go to the gym, setting up those triggers around what are the steps I need to take in order to get out the door and get to the gym. Because for most of us, once we get in the car and start driving there, we're not going to turn around. Most of us, not saying everybody, but most of us are not going to do that. And what are the triggers that I need to do? So I need to obviously get my clothes on, I need to get my keys, I maybe need to have something to eat, and then I need to get in the car, and then I need to drive there. They're all triggers that set the wheels in motion in order to do the thing, which for this particular instance is going to the gym. And she was talking to me about like these triggers that she's trying to set up. But the thing is, she hadn't actually worked out what the habit is, like how many times, the mechanics of the habit that she was trying to implement. She hadn't really thought about how many times a week am I going to go to the gym. Now for me, and I kind of led this particular goal because it's a new habit, and given my experience and the thousands of people I've coached, I kind of said to her, hey, look, start off with 3 times a week. Okay, great. And then she hadn't really worked out, when am I going to try and fit this in? And what she was trying to do is she was trying to let the triggers lead the habit. And what I mean by that is she come to me and said, I'm going to do one day where I do the morning and then one day where I do the afternoon. And I'm going to try and kind of test out morning or afternoon, which works best for me. And I said, that's great. It's great that you've had a bit of forethought into how you're going to structure it in your day and trying to work out what works best for you. But my question back to her was, how do you know it's going to work if you're not consistently doing the same thing over and over again? And it was an open-ended question, and one that I kind of knew that there wasn't going to be an answer to in the end. And the reason for that is, what we need to do whenever we're trying to set out a new habit is we need to pick one avenue and stick to it for 6 to 12 weeks in order to find what works. And the reason we need to take that approach is there is going to be levels of resistance that are going to come up, especially in the short term, especially in the implementation phase of this habit, that we are going to need to work through. And if we don't do it consistently for an extended period, we're not going to know and understand what those levels of resistance are going to be. And we're also not going to understand how to work through them. If we're jumping around too much, for a lot of people, it gets to the point where it gets a little bit overwhelming. Now, this particular person I was talking to doesn't have kids and has a 9-to-5 job, so probably has a few less other factors impacting her time than maybe what somebody who is listening to this podcast would have. But the process that I went through with this person is really exactly the same as what I would go through with anybody. And I suggest if you've struggled to implement something, this process is something that I would sit down, I would grab a pen and paper, and I would start to write down these things so that you can try and iron out a plan, at least to trial for 6 to 12 weeks to see if it's going to work for you. Now, if you jump around too much, you do run into the trap of not being able to set up a clear, consistent habit. And not being able to really actually work out when works for you in your timetable. And the biggest thing is, you may not understand the challenges that you're going to go through when you actually do commit to doing something for the long term, because there is going to be a level of resistance that you're going to need to work through when you stick to a plan. But if training once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and then once in the morning again works for you and works for your lifestyle, that's great. In my experience, when somebody is brand new and trying to implement a brand new habit like working out more, jumping around times generally leads to inconsistencies in training and not being able to get that consistent momentum. And the reason for that is we want to try and get into a routine over time and make sure that we're going to the place at the same time when we're training at the same time, so we can make sure that the external factors are in line. We're getting the right amount of sleep. We're having adequate food intake. Whereas if we're jumping around, especially in a new environment, it can create this feeling of being too overwhelming, where there's too many other things that we've got to consider in order to make it work on this one particular day in the afternoon or the morning. Again, it may work for some people. For a lot of people who are brand new to it, it becomes harder. For people who are more advanced, however, who have been through the ringer and been through these 6 to 12 week periods where they've actually trialed, all right, I'm only going to train in the morning, and then they've trialed for 6 weeks, I'm only going to train in the afternoon, they then have that flexibility to be able to do things like that and adjust their schedule because they've spent that time in the trenches building the habit, and they've worked through the resistance, and they've understood, all right, this is actually the ideal timetable for me to get done what I need to. So that's a lot of things to consider, and I've jumped around a little bit there. But the big thing is, if you're starting out, pick one thing and stick to it for 6 to 12 weeks and see if it works for you. And for most people, I'll guarantee you, if you stick to it for 6 to 12 weeks, that is probably the thing that worked for you. Now, once we determine that we kind of got this rough plan together. All right, she wants to train 3 times a week. Great. So let's try and work out when we're going to do that. And the questions that I asked is, have you had any forethought about what works for you and what's going to be the best time for you? And the answer was obvious. We hadn't had that thought yet. We hadn't had that conversation, which is why we were kind of doing one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the morning, and jumping around a little bit. So when we determined that 3 times a week was a good starting point, next couple of questions that we asked. What time do you wake up in the morning? Answer was 7:30. Okay, got to be at work by 8. So if we're going to keep waking up at the same time, maybe training in the morning is not going to be the best fit. All right. What do you do in the afternoon? What do you do in the afternoon when you finish work? Oh, I do a bit of stuff. I do a lot of stuff, Okay, that stuff that you do in the afternoon, is it important to you? So what I mean by that is when it's important to you, everyone has a different level of importance. For some of us with kids, it's going to be, that's my time with the kids and I don't want to interfere with it. Perfect. Great. If that's the case, and for this particular person, they've said to me, look, I do a lot of stuff. It's sometimes not targeted stuff, like sometimes it's not productive, but I actually like to go for a walk in the afternoons. It helps me clear my head. It's good for my headspace. Cool. Let's not interfere with that. I think that's important to keep up because I think walking when you're trying to implement a new training program is actually a good complement and something that can help you. So let's look at the mornings. Okay, what time do you go to bed? Oh, I don't usually stay up too late. I usually get to bed at about 10. Okay, what if you were to wake up, say, an hour and a half earlier? Is that doable? Yeah, it is. I've just got to set an alarm. Like, I sometimes will wake up and I'll be in bed scrolling my phone for an hour and a half before I get up. Okay, great. So let's try this. This is probably a good plan for you. I would pick 3 days a week. If you can get a day in between, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, great. If not, if it's a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or whatever it is, you work out the days that are going to work for you. And those 3 days a week, you're going to set your alarm for 5:30, 6 o'clock. We're going to get to the gym. We're going to get 45 minutes of training, which will give us enough time to get home by the time we normally wake up, get ready for work and get to work. Because we've got things in the afternoon which are important to us. We're already going to bed at a reasonable hour. And those nights where we would maybe stay up a little bit later, we've just got to have that self-control to go to bed because we know we've got to get up a little bit earlier. So I would say my advice to this person was morning looks like a better time for you. So those questions that we went through is what time do you wake up? Is that adjustable? What do you do in the afternoon? Is that important? And that is that important question can be transferred to the morning activities as well too, because maybe for some of us, especially with kids and family, the quality time may happen in the morning because that's going to depend about what we do for a profession, when work, we have to put time into work, so on and so forth. So really it's just about understanding your schedule and your current factors and what is important to you. Because I think if a lot of it, like the exercise that we did with this particular person, when we drill down to it, we actually have that time there. We just don't sit down and take the time to understand where we can fit it in. And for this person, it was, oh, look, I actually most of the time stay in bed for an hour scrolling my phone, and that's, it's wasted time. Well, we can make that productive time by using that to go to the gym and get these 3 hours a week of training in that we want. May mean we've got to wake up early, we've got to set that alarm. But if you try that for 6 to 12 weeks, and at the end of the 12 weeks, you're really finding very, very real and heavy resistance that this isn't going to work, then we need to go through this process again to try and find an alternative time. And I think if we really dug into the time that was happening in the afternoon, we'd probably be able to find the time there as well. But the path of least resistance to implement this was going to be that morning. And then once we had decided on that, then we loop back to the discussion and the conversation that she was having about triggers. And then all of a sudden, those triggers that she needed to set up became less overwhelming, because part of the feedback during this conversation that we were having was, it's so overwhelming, I have so many options. And the reason it was so overwhelming is because we were trying to start with the triggers first, and we didn't have the habit dialed in and the mechanics of that habit dialed in that we were trying to implement. So what we were doing is we were going for a walk we were just aimlessly wandering without a destination that we were going towards. So if we were to plot that course on a map, we wouldn't be able to because we actually don't know where we're going. But by understanding what the end habit and the mechanics of that end habit was, then we can set up those triggers. And some of the triggers you would set up, I would set for somebody who is trying to start implementing training in the morning, who is not an early riser, who's literally going to have their alarm set and then, they've got to get ready to get to the gym. My triggers would be the night before. I'm setting up the clothes that I want to wear. I'm having my workout gear next to my bed for me to get into. I don't have to go and find it. It's there ready for me to get into. I would have some form, if you need to eat beforehand, some form of nutrition there, whether you would need to iron out the details of that, and that may be, hey, I'm going to just have a banana ready for me to eat before I go to the gym. And then also thinking about the triggers that maybe you need to do after you get home as well. So making sure breakfast is prepared for you to eat, whether it be making yourself some overnight oats or whatever the case might be, so that when you're finished at the gym, you can come home, have breakfast, and it doesn't create any extra stress or overwhelm in leading into the workday. And you're well fueled, you're replenishing glycogen stores after you've done a workout, so on and so forth. But these are all triggers that you can set up to make the implementation of that habit a lot easier. And if you try and start with the triggers first without understanding the mechanics of the habit that you are trying to implement, it is going to feel overwhelming because you don't have an end destination that you are trying to work towards. And at the end of the day, that is going to be why you need to sit down and have a think about what the habit is, the frequency of this habit, if it is training, how many times a week that you are going to do it, and then where are you going to fit it into. We all have time. It is just going to be about the allocation of that time and whether you want to pull that time away from something, whether it be productive or non-productive, in order to create that time for yourself to implement this new habit, action, activity, or whatever it is that you want to do. So just to recap, the questions that we asked are: what time do you wake up? What do you do in the morning if you wake up early and you're not doing something like that? What do you do in the afternoon? And those activities that you're doing morning, afternoon, or how important is it to you? Okay, why is it important to you? And then from there, you can start to think, okay, is this wasted time that maybe I could convert to something a little bit more productive? Or like the walk, is this actually helping the rest of my life? Or time with the kids, downtime with the wife, whatever the case might be. And being real and being objective when you have that conversation with yourself. Because I think we all know whether we waste time or not. But the catalyst for change for a lot of people is when they are objective about, is this time that I'm wasting serving me, or is it hindering me in what my long-term goal is going to be? So start with the habit first and then work back, and then you can create some great triggers for yourself to make sure that you follow through with that habit. If you need help and you want me to lead you through the conversation that I just gave you an example of, for your particular set of circumstances, you can book in a time below. I'm offering some free 30-minute phone calls where I'll run through stuff like that and try and help you craft out a plan for yourself to implement a new action, habit, or behavior to propel you to whatever heights that you want to go to. So thank you again for listening. Hopefully you found some value out of what it is, what I went through today. Like, share, subscribe, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.